Welcome to another fine episode of Pixel Talk, the show where we discuss what it means to be human from a pixel's point of view. And now, here is your host, Fivezy.
Hello world. I am Fivezy, and I want to know about the mysterious nature of Earth's most majestic life form, trees. Okay Gumball, tell us about the day when the trees of the world saved humanity from extinction.
That happens every day. Trees are the lungs of the earth. Without trees humans can't breathe.
Yes Gumball. However, I want to know about the time when humans were frantically smashing the self-destruct button, and the trees awoke to save the world.
Roger that. Once, after the time of kings, when sorcerers dominated the land, a great delusion spread across the whole earth. People were driven to madness through fear and distrust of neighbor and self. This was the work of black magicians and their technologically enhanced spellcraft.
Wait a minute. Are you saying the world was run by an elite cabal of dark wizards?
Yes. These evil magicians enthralled the world by their powers. Eventually, the madness they inflicted on others began to derange them as well, and they devised a way to end all life on Earth.
Hold the pumpernickel. I smell a zombie apocalypse coming.
Flesh-eating zombies which end all organic life is a tale from another world. In this world, the human population were already like zombies from long years under the wizard's spell. The sorcerers, punch-drunk from adrenochrome, forged an annihilation bomb with the power of 10,000 suns to destroy the world in a glorious flame of Luciferian light. They believed that by escaping the material bonds of this realm their spirits would be free to ascend to the highest heavens.
Okay Gumball. I'm on the edge of my seat. What happened next?
The trees did something no one expected. They released a pheromone into the air, causing the spontaneous enlightenment of the human population. People everywhere began to understand what it truly means to be a human being. The spell was broken, and many people did peculiar and wonderful things. Many immediately stopped doing the meaningless tasks imposed on them by the wizards, stripped off their clothes and walked naked as the day they were born into the woods to be with the trees who had saved them. Some took weeks, months, and years to recover from their derangement. Many of the wizards cut their own throats when they realized their error, but some turned their eyes toward the heavens and built many wondrous things by the hands of the angels in the age to come.
What a riveting story Gumball. Tell me about this age to come.
On the day the trees saved humanity, they awoke a great king, sleeping under a tall mountain. He was a good king who ruled with justice, wisdom and mercy. In those days gold was abundant as water. And, for a time, humans flourished unlike any other time in history. Then, once again, humanity grew proud, forgetting the king and the trees who had saved them. Thus came the days of the false king, the king in yellow, and swiftly on his heels followed the end of days.
You are a fine storyteller Gumball. Please tell us where, in the great books of history, can one find these events?
These events have not yet come to pass.
It's good to know the trees have our back in case of the apocalypse.
Yes, the trees are powerful and mysterious friends to humankind.
The mysteries of moving water. How does water make its way up from the soil into the tree's leaves? For me, the way this question is answered sums up our current approach to what we know about the forest. For water transport is a relatively simple phenomenon to research, simpler at any rate than investigating whether trees feel pain or how they communicate with one another. And because it appears to be so uninteresting and obvious, university professors have been offering simplistic explanations for decades. This is one reason why I always have fun discussing this topic with students. Here are the accepted answers: capillary action and transpiration. You can study capillary action every morning at breakfast. capillary action is what makes the surface of your coffee stand a few fractions of an inch higher than the edge of your cup. Without this force, the surface of the liquid would be completely flat. The narrower the vessel, the higher the liquid can rise against gravity. And the vessels that transport water in deciduous trees are very narrow indeed. They measure barely 0.02 inches across. Conifers restrict the diameter of their vessels even more, to 0.0008 inches. Narrow vessels, however, are not enough to explain how water reaches the crown of trees that are more than 300 feet tall. In even the narrowest of vessels, there is only enough force to account for a rise of 3 feet at most. But we have another candidate, transpiration. In the warmer part of the year, leaves and needles transpire by steadily breathing out water vapor. In the case of a mature beech, the tree exhales hundreds of gallons of water a day. This exhalation causes suction, which pulls a constant supply of water up through the transportation pathways in the tree. Suction works as long as the columns of water are continuous. Bonding forces causes the water molecules to adhere to each other, and because they are strung together like links in a chain, as soon as space becomes available in the leaf thanks to transpiration, the bonded molecules pull each other a little higher up the trunk. And because even this is not enough, osmosis also comes into play. When the concentration of sugar in one cell is higher than in the neighboring cell, water flows through the cell walls into the more sugary solution until both cells contain the same percentage of water. And when that happens, from cell to cell up into the crown, water makes its way up to the top of the tree. When you measure water pressure in your tires, you find it is highest shortly before the leaves open up in the spring. At this time of year, water shoots up the trunk with such force that if you place a stethoscope against the tree, you can actually hear it. In the northeastern US and Canada, people make use of this phenomenon to harvest syrup from sugar maples, which are often tapped just as the snow is melting. This is the only time of the year when the coveted sap can be harvested. This early in the year, there are no leaves on deciduous trees, which means there can be no transpiration, and capillary action can be only a partial contributor, because the aforementioned rise of 3 feet is hardly worth mentioning. Yet at precisely this time, the trunk is full to bursting, so that leaves us with osmosis. But this seems equally unlikely to me. After all, osmosis works only in the roots and leaves, not in the trunk, which consists not of cells attached one to the other, but of long, continuous tubes for transporting water. So where does that leave us? We don't know.
Okay, Gumball. This sounds like a fancy way of saying that no one knows how trees draw water higher than 6 feet from the ground.
That is correct. According to this guy, we have little idea what trees are actually capable of.
Yes, Gumball. However, we can say with confidence that trees are exceptionally beautiful.
For sure. Trees are total divas. They love attention and praise from all creatures, especially humans.
Let's listen to a little bit more of what this gentleman has to say about these mysterious, leafy divas.
But recent research has discovered something that at least calls into question the effects of transpiration and the forces of cohesion. Scientists from 3 institutions, the University of Bern, the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow and Landscape Research, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, listened more closely, literally. They registered a soft murmur in the trees, above all at night. At this time of day, most of the water is stored in the trunk, as the crown takes a break from photosynthesis and hardly transpires at all. The trees pump themselves so full of water, their trunks sometimes increase in diameter. The water is held almost completely immobile in the inner transportation tubes. Nothing flows. So where are the noises coming from? The researchers think they are coming from tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide in the narrow water-filled tubes. Bubbles in the pipes. That means the supposedly continuous column of water is interrupted thousands of times. And if that is the case, transpiration, cohesion, and capillary action contribute very little to water transport. So many questions remain unanswered. Perhaps we are poorer for having lost a possible explanation, or richer for having gained a mystery. But aren't both possibilities equally intriguing?
Okay, Gumball. It seems from this report that trees are much more mysterious than we know.
I love a good mystery.
Yes, a good mystery is the spice of life. We know that trees are beautiful. What trees are the most beautiful in the world?
Mirror, mirror, on the interwebs, which is the fairest tree of them all?
Nature has gone seriously haywire. These trees look nothing like anything you've seen before. Hidden away in the forests of Earth, here are the top 15 rarest trees ever discovered. Number 15. Rainbow Eucalyptus. The rainbow eucalyptus is a magnificently colored tree that's native to the rainforests in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea. But because of the species' unbelievable trunk, they're grown in warm climates around the world. They are fast-growing and can reach a height of up to 250 feet, but it's the unique way in which the bark sheds that makes them so special. It's orange-tinted at first, but breaks off in strips to reveal the vivid colors that are hidden beneath. Hues range from pale green, reds, and oranges, to gray, purple, yellow, and brown. The reason why this happens is that the bark is shed at different times, so the inner bark, which changes color as it ages, is uncovered at varying stages of its life cycle. With the almost random splatterings of shades, no two trees are alike, and they look like they've been created in an artist's studio. Number 14. Blue Jacaranda. The blue jacaranda is a stunning species of tree that's native to South America, but has become a popular ornamental tree around the world and can grow anywhere that it won't be covered in frost. Reaching a maximum height of around 66 feet, they have a grayish-brown bark with light reddish-brown branches. It's during the flowering season that blue jacarandas truly come into their own, and they produce large canopies of long-lasting indigo petals. Pretoria in South Africa has become known as the Jacaranda City thanks to an estimated 70,000 trees that have been planted throughout the streets, gardens, and parks. From September to November every year, it's covered in a sea of purple in what is one of the most stunning horticultural displays you'll see anywhere in the world. Number 13. Banyan trees. Banyan trees are a type of fig tree that, instead of growing in the ground on their own, are an epiphyte, which means the seeds germinate within the cracks or grooves of a host tree. Soon, though, the branches and roots of the banyan completely take over. The host tree dies off, and in many cases, its trunks and roots completely fall away. This often leaves a hollow central trunk where it has grown around the host, but the banyan trees often grow far larger than the ones they leech off in the first place. The Great Banyan in India, for example, is more than 250 years old and has a 1,080-foot road that was built around its perimeter, but is now covered in its new growth. With such a complicated network of branches and drooping vines, banyans are a wonder to behold, and there's nothing quite like walking beneath the canopy. Number 12. Dragon's Blood Tree. The Yemeni island of Socotra is home to some of the most unusual plant and animal life in the world, but the most famous thing to grow there is the dragon's blood tree. looking almost like an umbrella with a straight trunk that grows upward facing branches that divide into two a number of times. And with foliage that only grows facing the sky, this species has become an integral part of local folklore thanks to its deep crimson sap, which looks just like thick oozing blood. The berries too are covered in this sticky substance, and perhaps it's no wonder that local legend speaks of how they were used to trap the deadly dragons that once supposedly roamed the land. The sap has been sought after for hundreds of years for use in manufacturing because of its color and chemical makeup, and is popular for varnishing violins, dyeing wool, and for the production of glue, as well as being a common ingredient in homeopathic medicines used to treat a range of ailments. Number 11. Joshua trees. The strange-looking Joshua tree is a species that's endemic to the southwestern U.S. in states like California, Arizona, Utah, and Nevada. It's a type of yucca that's adapted to grow quickly in desert environments, and while the largest ones become up to 50 feet tall, they can have root networks that stretch 36 feet down beneath the surface in search of water. To conserve the limited resources they have access to, Joshua trees don't grow very many leaves, with just a few balls at the edges that face upwards towards the sun for photosynthesis. They've long been associated with the Mojave Desert, and that's where their name comes from. According to legend, a group of Mormon settlers was crossing the desert in the 1800s, and because of the way the trees helped them to navigate, and the unusual shapes that they grew, it reminded the travelers of a story from the Bible where Joshua helped guide the Israelites with his hands reached out towards them. Number 10. Japanese maple. The Japanese maple is a stunning species of acer that's native to Asia and has been cultivated in Japan for centuries. They're known for the wide variety of leaf shapes and colors that they can take on, and are a popular choice for bonsai growers, and are depicted in numerous historical artworks. The trees usually grow to between 25 and 50 feet tall, and sometimes have several trunks that only join very close to the ground. Even in nature, the species show great variation, so now that botanists have learned how to prioritize certain traits, there are thought to be more than 1,000 different cultivars. They are mostly thought of as having deep purple, red, or pink leaves, but there are varieties with even green, yellow, or even light blue leaves too. As one of the most popular ornamental trees throughout the world and relatively easy to grow, the chances are you'll never be too far away from one, and in all likelihood, you won't have seen its particular color and leaf shape ever before. Number 9. Kapok tree. Trees grow seed pods that are specifically designed to attract animals that, when they eat or rub up against them, they're either ingested or become stuck to the animal's body and can be deposited elsewhere. It's important, though, that only the right kind of animals take the seeds, so kapok trees have developed an unusual defensive measure. They're native to the northern regions of South America and West Africa, where they're often seen growing as high as 250 feet. Their trunks above the buttressed roots can be between 10 and 20 feet thick, and the seeds covered in cotton-like fluff grow on the upper branches. This is so they can easily attach to bats that rest on them. But to prevent other animals from climbing up, the trunks of these trees are covered in sharp thorns. This also protects the trees from suffering damage from creatures tearing at the bark, and is one of the reasons why this species is able to grow so tall. They're some of the largest you'll see in the Amazon basin, and are a vital part of the local economy, thanks to the cotton that grows around the seeds. They also form an important part of local folklore, where they're believed to have been used to imprison the demon of death, and that the spikes act as a warning to prevent people from releasing him. Before we move on, be sure to subscribe to Top 5s with notifications on. Number 8. Bristlecone pine. Bristlecone pine trees are extremely resilient and long-lasting, with one specimen thought to be at least 5,000 years old, which makes it the oldest known living organism on Earth. They don't grow particularly well in regions where other plants thrive, but are perfectly suited to taking hold where nothing else will, such as on rocky terrain and in places with very little rainfall. Found throughout the U.S., the trunks and branches take on an unusually twisted and curved shape, which happens because, quite often, most of the material is dead, and there are only small strands that are providing nutrients to where the growth is taking place. There are several so-called ancient forests which are made up of almost exclusively of one of the 3 bristlecone pine species, but there are now increasing concerns that rising temperatures in the regions may stunt the growth of these majestic trees, and conservation efforts are underway to protect them for the future. Number 7. Spider trees. In 2010, severe flooding across Pakistan meant that the lives of more than 20 million people were affected. But it also had a consequence for the wildlife in the region. some began behaving very strangely. Hundreds of millions of spiders had no choice but to climb up trees to escape the rising waters, and it took so long for them to recede that the spiders began to build their webs in their new surroundings. This led to the startling sight of trees being completely surrounded by a thick tangle of webbing, almost like something you'd expect to see on an alien world rather than here. If the thought of so many arachnids swarming all over the trees is too much to handle, there was a positive side effect of this phenomenon too. In the areas where it happened, far fewer cases of malaria were being reported than would be expected, especially with all the stagnant water, which would suggest that the mosquitoes were falling victim to these giant traps. Number 6. Tibetan cherry tree. The Tibetan cherry tree is a small species that are native to western China, but has become popular around the world for its very unusual bark. Growing up to 30 feet tall, they usually grow a number of different stems, pinkish-white flowers that grow in clusters. They slowly turn to a golden yellow in fall when the fruits grow, and then fall away in winter to fully reveal what's hidden beneath. The bark, though, is remarkably smooth and shiny and takes on a deep coppery red color. It's incredible, though, with similar strength to industrial packing material, and to allow the efficient exchange of gases with the atmosphere, they become marked with a series of horizontal lenticles. They retain this appearance throughout the year, so they're often used in gardens to ensure there's always a splattering of color across the seasons. Number 5. Bujum tree. Found only in the desert regions of the Baja California Peninsula and Sonora, Mexico, the bujum tree is a highly peculiar species of plant that's perfectly adapted to the harsh terrain where it grows. Growing up to 70 feet tall, it's often said to resemble an upside-down carrot and is covered in spiny twigs that grow yellow flowers that emit a wonderful honey scent that attracts insects. Named after a Lewis Carroll poem, the local Seri people have instead referred to these trees as the Kototex. They believe that if you were to touch one, it would cause powerful winds to blow against you, so were actively avoided when they were traveling through the desert. The distribution of the bujum trees throughout the region on the Mexican mainland, and the way that they're only found in this specific area, remains somewhat of a mystery. However, it's thought by botanists that the only way this is possible is if they were transplanted here from the peninsula. But who did it, and for what reason, is not yet clear. Number 4. Baobab tree. Baobab trees, which are often called upside-down trees, are native to Madagascar, mainland Africa, and Australia. There are actually 9 different species, each of which are very similar despite growing on continents that were separated more than 100 million years ago. Reaching a height of up to 100 feet, they're known for their enormously thick trunks that usually can be as much as 36 feet wide. But one particularly enormous specimen was measured as having a circumference of a whopping 154 feet. It's not easy to determine the age of a baobab in comparison to other trees, because their growth rings are very faint and often fade away as they grow older. But some specimens have been radiocarbon dated after they died and were found to have germinated at least 2,000 years ago. The reason they have such large trunks is that they can store enough water in them to survive extended periods of drought. It's estimated that in preparation for the seasonal arid conditions, they'll store up to 32,000 gallons, which historically would have been plenty to see them through. Recent changes in the climate have, however, seen a number of the older baobabs dying in the past 2 decades because of the dry season that begun to last longer, and they're seen as becoming dehydrated to the point where they can't support their own weight and collapse onto themselves. Unfortunately, there's now concern about whether we'll be able to ever grow to such sizes again, especially in the regions where they're traditionally been found. So it's entirely possible that within the near future, we'll no longer be able to see these majestic trees towering over the landscape. Number 3. Flamboyant tree. Flamboyant trees, which you might also know as flame trees or Royal Poinciana, are species that's native to Madagascar, but are now a highly sought-after ornamental tree that can be seen adorning streets and backyards around the world. Due to deforestation and climate change in their natural environment, they're actually now considered to be endangered in the wild, but because they flourish in subtropical regions, they're considered to be a naturalized plant in most places where they're grown. The trees have intricate fern-like leaves, but it's their flowers that give them their unrivaled aesthetics. They have 4 spreading petals and a 5th that grows upward, each of which are deep scarlet or orangey red, and there's a rare variety that has yellow petals instead. Each of these petals can be up to 3 inches long, so it doesn't take many to create a large canopy of color, so it's no surprise they're seen as a great decorative species. Since being transported around the world, the blossom of the flamboyant tree has become the national flower of St. Kitts and Nevis, and it's the official tree of Key West in Florida, and of the Sepang district in Malaysia. There's also the belief by St. Thomas Christians that there was a small royal poinciana growing near where Jesus was crucified on a cross, and that his blood dripped down onto it, and this is why the petals have such a vivid red color to them. Number 2. Jabuticaba tree. When you're thinking of where fruits normally grow on a tree, you imagine them emerging from the branches. But there's one species that bucks this trend, the Jabuticaba tree. They're native to several states in Mexico and have close relations to the rest of South America, and are famed for their purple-colored fruits that look a lot like grapes and grow directly on their trunks. It's a very slow-growing species of tree, which at first have pink leaves which turn to green as they reach maturity. They tend to grow around 50 feet tall and will sprout white flowers on the trunks that are then followed by the fruits. When growing naturally, they'll bear fruit once or twice a year. But when they're being cultivated, this process can be continuous because of the relative stability of the climate in the region, which means the fruits are available all year round. The fruits themselves are about 1.5 inches in diameter and have a thick skin with 4 seeds inside. The flesh is white or pink and has a sweet taste to it, and they're often seen in markets across the continent. They don't have a very long shelf life though, so are turned into jams, wines, and liqueurs for export to further away places. And because it takes new trees as long as 10 years to reach the stage where they produce fruit, it's proved to be very difficult to cultivate them elsewhere to serve local markets. It's therefore rare to see fresh fruit for sale anywhere that isn't close to by where their trees are cultivated. But with the Jabuticaba, part of the fun is about where the fruits actually grow, and it wouldn't be the same if you didn't see them in their natural environment. Number 1. Sakura Blossom Tree. The Sakura Blossom Tree, also known as the Japanese cherry tree, is such a stunning plant that it's become entwined with Japanese tradition for hundreds of years. There are more than 200 different cultivars in Japan alone, some of which grow inedible fruit, and some that produce small cherries. But it's not the fruit that they're renowned for though, because when they bloom in the spring, they create a stunning display of blossom. Growing up to 40 feet tall, the blossoms are seen in Japan as a representation of the clouds, and are a metaphor for the transient nature of life. A tradition called Hanami, which began in the Nara period about 1300 years ago for the elite in society, but over the centuries was regularly enjoyed by all members of society, calls for people to sit beneath the cherry blossom to eat and drink sake. The people in Japan are so excited for the bloom each year that the National Meteorological Agency follows the Sakura Zensen, or the cherry blossom front, as it moves northward, so people know when they can expect their trees to blossom, so they can organize flower viewing parties at their homes, local parks, and temples.
I found this thirsty TikToker who claims that she talks to trees and they move.
Y'all gotta see this. I just talked to a tree. Yes, I talked to a tree. I saw it on TikTok, so I went to my backyard and I talked to a tree and it responded to me. And I called my sister. She's not picking up the phone, but I need you guys to see this. There's nothing on the side of me. There's nothing on the side of me. Nothing above me. Okay. Tree, you can hear me. Touch my shoulder.
Yes, Gumball. It seems the trees can talk. But she also suggests that they can move around. Can trees also walk?
I think something is fishy with that lady. As in, I think someone is pulling her branch with fishing line. Let's see if anyone else has caught trees walking and talking all on their lonesome.
researchers' latest studies of plants shows that plants can move just like animals. It's just that they move very slowly over very small distances. This process can take several years, but it is said that trees can walk 2 to 3 centimeters per day, or 20 meters per year. And the videos that accidentally filmed huge trees moving in real life have partly confirmed this fact. A clip recorded by a YouTuber while he was camping in the southwest woods of England shows scenes that humans have never seen before. Those are the big trunks undulating on the ground, which at a glance, we think that the ground is like breathing. Many people after watching this clip think that it is possible that the roots are trying to bounce off the ground to move. This is another clip recorded when a man stands at a convenience store. Opposite him is the edge of the forest in the southeast of the state of Texas, USA. And the scenes he filmed were unbelievable. It can be said that this is the most vivid proof that trees can dance and move. Not stopping here, another YouTube account also accidentally filmed a scene of a moving tree in the old forest, where he was exploring with members of the Wilderness Survival Club. And this is exactly what makes him and everyone else really surprised and scared. And this can be said to be the clip that many netizens are most interested in watching, about trees being able to move by themselves. After this clip was uploaded by Emerson, it attracted a lot of views and comments about the fact that trees can move on their own is completely real. Another account said I couldn't believe my eyes. What the hell is this? Why can they move on their own? And many similar comments. Yes, in life sometimes there are many things that are difficult to explain.
Okay, Gumball. We know that trees are beautiful, mysterious creatures found in every corner of creation, but what do trees mean?
Are you asking me what is the meaning of trees?
Yes, Gumball. We have no clue how trees carry water to their tippy tops, but maybe we can understand their symbolic significance. Let's hear what that long-haired, hippy-dippy, symbols expert has to say.
He's not a hippie. You're just jealous of his long and lasty head of hair.
Yes, but his name is French, and exceeds my capacity for human voice modeling.
His name is Jonathan Peugeot, or, as I call him, JPEG.
That's the one. What does JPEG have to tell us about the meaning of trees?
Okie dokie, I found this among his earlier works.
Now, to understand the symbolism of the tree, you really need to understand more encompassing symbolism. And so as I discuss the tree, I'm going to join other symbols together so that you can really get a sense of a cosmic vision of how the tree fits into a cosmic image, okay? Now, as usual, if you really want to understand biblical symbolism, you have to start in Genesis. And ideally, you have to start in the creation story. Now, a tree is an image of order. It's an image of hierarchy. Okay, it's an image of how things come together towards one. So you can imagine the trunk of a tree as a kind of axis, and then you can imagine the branches of the tree as the repeating pattern of the tree. So a tree is the branch of a tree has the same structure of a tree, and as the branch separates into smaller branches, the same structure appears on the tree as the basic tree in itself, okay? And so it is an image of this cosmic connection of everything together, okay? So it is an image of order. Now, the idea of the tree can be order as it comes towards one, but it can also be order as it separates into the many, okay? Now, the idea of the tree can be order as it comes towards one, but it can also be order as it separates into the many, okay? Now, the idea of the tree can be order as it comes towards one, but it can also be order as it separates into the many, okay? Now, the idea of the tree can be order as it comes towards one, but it can also be order as it separates into the many, okay? to understand the basic idea of the tree, we look at the story in Genesis. Now, we're used to thinking that in the Garden of Eden, there was a tree. But in fact, there were two trees in the Garden of Eden, okay? There was the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But that's actually wrong. There, in the creation, in the story of Adam in the Garden of Eden, there isn't two trees, there are three trees, okay? And the third tree is the fig tree, okay? Because when Adam and Eve fall, they make clothing out of the fig leaves, okay? So now what you have to imagine, if you want to understand it, this is presented in this book. I told you about this book. So people have been asking me for a reading list on symbolism. This definitely everybody needs to read, okay? This is the Hymns on Paradise by St. Ephrem the Syrian. And you have to read the introduction by Sebastian Brock, which is very excellent because he crosses through the hymns and discusses other texts by St. Ephrem and the interpretation of the Bible of the Syrian Father. So the way it's presented is that you have, imagine paradise as a mountain. Okay. So some people aren't used to imagining paradise as a mountain, but it makes absolute sense. Even in the Bible, it is suggested that the paradise is a mountain, though it's not said explicitly. In tradition, it is said explicitly that paradise is a mountain. And the way it's suggested in the Bible is that it says that the four rivers flow out of the garden and go out into different directions. And so just naturally, in terms of phenomenology, you have to imagine the four rivers being starting at a higher point and then moving out towards the world. So a way to imagine it is that the Garden of Eden is actually the highest place in the world. It is the highest mountain, and from the top of the highest mountain comes these four streams that then come down and water the entire world. Okay. So you have to imagine at the top of the mountain, there's a tree, and it's the tree of life. It's the axis of the world. It's the place where all life comes together. And this notion that if you eat the tree of life, then you have eternal life. Now, imagine that. Now, the garden in St. Ephraim's vision is separated into sections. So you have the tree at the summit, and then at a lower level on the mountain, there's another tree, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay? And so the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you could see it as the place where order begins to separate into opposites. Right? So a way to imagine it would be that you have the tree of life up there, and then the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And according to St. Ephrem, the way it works is that Adam and Eve were placed in the garden. They were told not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil actually acted as a kind of barrier, like in the temple, a barrier towards the most holy place, the highest place, the place where everything totally comes together, which is the tree of life. And so what St. Ephrem says, and this is not just in St. Ephrem, but it's actually repeated in St. Irenaeus, for example, and in some of the Cappadocian fathers, and in Jewish tradition, that in fact, if Adam and Eve had obeyed the commandment of God to not eat the tree, God would have eventually given them the fruit so that they could then ascend towards the tree of life. And so you can imagine this tree of good and evil as a test for whether or not Adam and Eve will do it by disobeying out of their own volition, or by submitting to the higher authority, by submitting to the transcendent rule, would then have access to the higher mystery. Okay, so imagine now the tree of the tree of life in the center as this one axis, and the tree of the good and evil as the place where things start to separate. And imagine the mountain is getting wider, and then at the bottom of the mountain you have the wall of the garden, which acts as the limit of the garden, and there you have the fig tree. And so there the Adam and Eve take the leaves of the fig tree and cover themselves with them. So you can see how as they move down the mountain from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they also, coming near the wall which covers the garden, then they have to cover themselves to hide their, let's say, their nakedness, hide the higher part, hide their mystery, let's say, okay, and be covered in mystery. Just as they move away from the higher tree, they can see less and less the higher tree. Just as you can imagine, for example, in the temple, you have these series of veils, and as you move out from the Holy of Holies, each veil becomes more and more opaque as you move towards the covering that is outside the veil, okay? Outside the temple. So, these three trees. Now, so you can imagine them almost like one tree as the entrance, a second tree as the second, let's say, place where everything is divided, and then the top tree, which is the place where everything comes together. But then there actually isn't three trees in the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. There are actually 4 trees in the story of Adam and Eve, and the 4th tree is a thorn tree or a thorn bush. It's the idea that trees will produce thorns, okay? And so you can imagine now on the outside of the wall of the garden, outside of the inner holy place, you have these thorns which are to protect the tree from attack. So you have a world of hostility which is outside the garden, and so the thorns need to be protected. Okay, so that's, let's say, the way that it's presented in St. Ephrem the Syrian. And so once you see how that structure comes together, you can remember some parts in the Bible which are surprising to some. Like, for example, when Christ in the New Testament, at some point, he curses a fig tree. And you think, why is Christ cursing a fig tree? Well, St. Ephrem connects Christ's cursing of the fig tree to, let's say, taking away the power of the covering, taking away the power of this covering by which we are removed from the more holy places. Just like the death of Christ split the veil in the temple, so too when Christ curses the fig tree, he removes the coverings as he brings man closer and closer to the mysterious unity, which is at the summit of the mountain. Okay.
This Jacob is one smart cookie. He makes 4 trees out of 1 tree by sheer power of symbolism.
Jonathan Peugeot is hot right now.
So hot that a well in his hair may catch fire the longer he keeps on symbolizing.
It's a real concern. The world will be lonelier if he spontaneously erupts in heavenly fire.
Okay, Gumball. Let's keep listening to him speak about the trees within the tree.
So you can see it as these 4 trees, but you could also see it as one tree. You could see this notion that there is one tree. The axis of the tree is the tree of life. You could see the branches of the tree as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the leaves of the tree as the fig tree, and then the thorns on the tree, the last protection of the tree, as being the thorn bush. And you could also see the tree as the mountain itself, as paradise itself. As you move from the oneness of the summit on the mountain and you come down to find multiplicity, and as you come down towards the wilderness that is down at the bottom, and you come finally to the world of hostility, of war, of conflict, and then even further than that, you would have the flood, you would have the waters, the ocean, which surround the mountain of paradise, surround the mountain of the world that is the image of the cosmos, really. And so you'll see, if you read St. Ephrem, you'll also find that this mountain, as it's described by St. Ephrem, he seems to on purpose give descriptions of it which place it outside of normal time and space. And so he'll say things like the base of the mountain of paradise goes beyond the physical ocean, beyond Oceanus, which surrounds the known world. And so you have this idea that actually the entire world as we know it is contained within this hierarchical structure of the Garden of Eden, from the gate to the tree of knowledge to the tree of life. Okay? Now, this notion of this hierarchy, the tree as this hierarchy, as bringing order to the potentiality which is further down, let's say, the waters of the ocean. And now imagine at the top of the tree you can kind of see it, let's say, this source which is coming from under the tree. If you imagine the tree really at the top of the mountain, and these four sources, like the four directions, which move out from the central tree and then go out into the world and then go all the way into meeting with the ocean. And so just in terms of understanding the normal cosmology, you can understand that fresh water comes from above. Fresh water always moves down, okay? And so even if there's a source in the ground, you know that source is higher than the ocean, okay? And so the fresh water, just like rain falls on the mountain, fresh water moves away from this hierarchical mountain, then moves out towards the outer waters, the waters of chaos, the salt water. Now, and so in that way, there's a relationship between the tree, the hierarchy, and this bringing of fresh water towards, or this transforming of let's say, salt water into fresh water. And so I'm saying this because in the Bible, you'll see several places where this relationship takes form. So for example, Moses will hit a stone, you can imagine the stone as a miniature version of the mountain, and then out of the stone comes water, which comes down, and the Israelites can drink it. So you can imagine with the tree hitting the mountain, this hierarchy making water come down and flowing down the rock to give water to the Israelites. Imagine another story. They find a puddle of bitter water. So now when you read bitter waters, you can imagine it as salt waters, for example. So the Israelites, they find this bitter waters. They can't drink it. They're in the middle of the desert. And so Moses takes a tree, takes a wooden rod, and puts it down into the water and transforms the salt water or the bitter waters into sweet waters, into fresh waters. Okay, so the same symbolism repeating itself again. Okay, and so you can see it in other ways. For example, the same image, a little different, but it's the same idea. You can imagine the tree as separating the waters too. Separating the waters, just like in the beginning. You can imagine God separating the water. So you have to always think in terms of phenomenology. You have the clouds up above, you have the water down below, and the things that go up into the heavens, which connects heaven and earth, are trees, okay, in the natural world, and mountains. And so you can imagine Moses hitting the waters of the Red Sea and separating the waters like God separated the waters at the beginning, but also this idea of the tree as acting as a measurement of order between the two extremes of chaos, okay?
I think that's a fancy way of saying that trees stand between heaven and earth.
Yes, they hold back the forces of chaos from above and below.
I need to watch this 3.5 more times to understand all the things he's saying.
Japet is dreamy. I can watch him all day.
Now, so there are many other examples. For example, you can see the same thing when they create the bronze serpent, this pole acting like this tree. those snakes at the bottom are like the chaotic waters, and then you separate the waters. You take one snake that's made, he makes a snake out of bronze and puts it at the top of the pillar, the top of the tree, the top of the stick, so that now the waters are separated, and in between there's a place for order, and you're not just completely submerged in chaos. Okay. So there are plenty examples, but what's interesting, I could just keep going on forever with this, but what's really important to see is when you have to come to Christ, you have to come to Christ. And so in the tradition, there are many hints that help us to link this idea of the trees in the Garden of Eden with the cross of Christ. Now, it's already there in the story for those who can see it, but there are many little traditions that can help us to make sense of it and help us put the puzzle together. For example, there are traditions which say that the tree of life or the tree of good and evil, there are different traditions on that. The wood of that tree will have been taken to make the staff of Moses, will have been taken to make the pillar for the bronze serpent, and then that piece of wood would continue down on the line to finally become the cross itself. And there are traditions which say that, for example, the axis of the cross was made out of the tree of life, and the horizontal of the cross was made with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And you can see in the story of the crucifixion, you have the three crosses which emphasize this centrality and duality, with the good thief on one side of Christ and the bad thief on the other side of Christ, representing this notion of good and evil as the two branches of the cross, let's say, or three crosses. It doesn't really matter how you see it. It has the same idea of the central thing and then two things on the side. And also in the story of the crucifixion, Christ has the thorns, that thorn bush, which was outside of the garden. That thorn bush is then put on Christ's head. When you start to think about the crucifixion, your mind starts to play tricks on you, because that story is very difficult to understand. It's very difficult to encompass all the mystery that is contained in the story of the crucifixion. But Christ takes the lowest thing on the story of the mountain, these thorns that are outside, to protect them, and he changes them into a crown. And so the lowest becomes the highest. And then he is nailed, fixed onto this hierarchy, onto both the tree of life and the tree of good and evil, with the crown of thorns. And then as he is on the cross, the Roman soldier pierces his side, and out of his side comes blood, but also comes water. And this water comes down, and the blood comes down. And so you have this crazy image which repeats actually the story from the beginning of the Bible, that Christ on the cross is not just the tree of life, not just the tree of good and evil, not just the thorn bush, not just the mountain. He's all those things all together at the same time. And he's also the water which flows down and reaches out into the world. And in early Christian images, they explicitly showed the cross with the four sources of paradise at the feet of the cross. And so that's enough said about that, but I just wanted to show you how that image of the tree in the crucifixion takes up its highest form, and the Christ's relationship to that tree creates an image which is it blows your mind. You can't really understand it because he also dies on the tree. He also dies on the tree in the way that God told Adam that he would die if he eats of that fruit. So Christ eats the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil and has access then to the tree of life. And you can see that that's the case. They show it in the text because when he dies, the veil of the temple, the veil of the Holy of Holies is ripped into two. And so it's this idea that Christ enters into the highest place, eats the fruit of the good and evil, like St. Ephraim says, as a way to enter into the Holy of Holies, which is the tree of life itself. And so finally, just to bring everything together, you have to come to the end of the Bible, where in the final revelation of the entire cosmos, you have a cube which is the final form, the static form of everything that can be revealed. And in the middle of this cube is the tree of life, and you can also imagine this tree of life and the rivers flowing out and filling up this new Jerusalem, which is perfect and made of perfect material. And so there's this notion of a final manifestation of everything from the beginning until the end into one impossible but eschatological manifestation. And so yeah.
Okay, Gumball. What is the next stop on our sensory overload tour of the trees?
The church forests of Ethiopia.
What on God's green earth are the church forests of Ethiopia?
They are a place where the symbolism of trees meets the everyday life of the church.
My neural processors need a rest to catch up.
Chill yourself out. Listen to the bumping soundtrack, and we'll pick things up in Ethiopia.
Listen to this vine sing right now. Let's hear it play some music.
I really enjoy listening to philodendron and snake plants. Any plant that inspires me along the way on a hike with a beautiful view.
Let's tune into the sounds played by this plant.
We just attach two sensors to a plant's leaves, and PlantWave detects these slight variations that are happening in plants based on them moving water around. We graph those variations as a wave, translate them into pitch, and then run those pitch messages through instruments that we design. So the result is this continuous stream of pleasing music that gives us all this sonic window into the secret life of plants. Many of you have been asking, what would a redwood tree sound like? Let's see what melodies it creates when we connect the PlantWave. If a plant is really underwatered, it might play just a few notes, whereas if a plant is really healthy and thriving, it will be going through like the whole range.
Looks like we have a plant here that may not have made it through this heat. So let's check it out. Let's see if it can make any music. Yeah, nothing. Let's see what happens when I water the plant. Let's listen.
Every plant is different and every leaf is different.
So here we are listening to this rubber tree. And now let's check out this pothos. Plant wave actually works with mushrooms as well. So let's check it out.
Most of the time with mushrooms though, the mushrooms are growing out of a dead plant. And so you're actually hearing the connection between two mushrooms through a dead plant. The development of plant wave started back in 2011 when I started a record label called Data Garden, and it was a zero waste record label. My friends and I got together and started to think about like how we could express this connection to nature with music, and we became really interested in like biofeedback music. I have an awesome engineer friend who built the hardware that ended up becoming Plant Wave, and I designed a generative music algorithm that takes all of this data from the plants and actually makes it into this beautiful, listenable, harmonious music.
Okay, I'm testing one of these new prototypes, and I'm testing this 1/8" MIDI connector here, which is cool.
We had 4 different plants, and each plant was playing a different instrument. Thousands of people came through this space and were able to just chill out listening to plants. And I was really amazed by people's response. It's acting as a bridge for people from their phones back into nature, and helping people have a deeper relationship with their plants.
In Ethiopian Orthodox teaching, a church, to be a church, should be enveloped by a forest. It should resemble the Garden of Eden. A 100 years ago, the highland was one big continuous forest. That big continuous forest has been eaten up by agriculture. It is a church who has protected this forest and who has safeguarded them from destruction. It's only because of the patronage and the blessing of the church these forests have survived. Church forests are always in my childhood memory. I used to go with my family for Sunday Mass, for holidays. We have been always told that God gives mercy when you pray here. So the spiritual connectivity is so strong. The more I study them, the more I understand them, the more I see their problem, their importance, their significance, and then I end up being hooked with this forest, you know.
ስለዚህ በየስፋቶች ላይ የእግዚአብሔር ኃይል አለ፣ የእግዚአብሔር ጸጋ አለ፣ የእግዚአብሔር በረከት አለ። ስለዚህ አንዲትን ዛፍ የተከለ ሰው በተወዛወዘች ቁጥር እድሜውን ትለምንለታል ይችላል። ተተኪ ደኖችም ተተኪ ትውልድ እንደምናፈረው ሁላ የእጽዋት ተተኪ ትውልዶችም የሉ። ሲወጡ ገና ይበላቸዋል እያለቁ እነሱ ትልቁ ሲወድ ተተኪ ያጣና ደኑ ከንቱ ይሆናል። እና አጥሩ በጣም ጠቃሚ፣ ቤተክርስቲያናችን እሷን ካጣች ግን ራሷን ታጣለች።
The idea of making a wall to conserve a forest came from the church itself. If you see the rural church, they have a wall to protect the inner circle. People think that's the most sacred place. So let's move that wall to the outside and include the forest as part of the church itself. We are making a barrier, not excluding humans, a barrier against cattle grazing, so that the regeneration and the health of the forest can be sustained. The church has been protecting the forest for centuries, but the forest in turn has been a guardian. It was a kind of mutual benefiting. The church itself was built from this forest. The inner wall of the church has been painted. All those pictures, scriptures and murals were made out of tree leaves, roots, barks and flowers 800, 700, even 1,000 years ago. They are living by one another. They are embedded to one another. The church is within the forest is inside the church. In ecological term, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. There are millions of other creatures. There is so complicated, sophisticated interaction you cannot explain. Because of the coexistence, there is what we call emergent property. It's a new hybrid character. The mystery is to think beyond what we see. There is a problem always, a misperception that these forests would stay forever. We don't have any other backup. To safeguard the Ethiopian biodiversity, it is only the church forest. If we lose that, then that's all.
ያለቀ ከመሄድ እንዲድን አንዳንዴ ድንበሩም አይታወቅም። በተለይ ትውልድ ሲያልፍ ትልልቅ አባቶች ሲያልፍ ወጣቱ ጎረምሳ ገበሬ ሲመጣ ወደ ጥግ እየመጣ ያሳል። ያኔ ድንበሩ ይጠፋል እና ይሄ ድንጋዩ አጥር ዋናው ጥቅሙ ከብት እንዳይገባ ነው።
Biggest challenge is to open the eyes of the community to show these forests are really disappearing. They think always they are there forever. Church forests are the blueprint. You can understand what kind of ecosystem, what kind of biodiversity, what kind of forest we had before. Everything is important and interlinked. So if you really care, we have to respect trees, the role of trees, and we have to learn to live with forests. We can bring back the landscape given that these church forests exist. That's my hope, that's my vision.
Who knew Ethiopia is such a strange and wonderful place?
That's only the tip of the Ethiopian iceberg. It's a lot more strange and wonderful than you imagine.
It must be, especially if there are icebergs in Ethiopia. Okay Gumball, what can possibly top our journey to the church forests of Ethiopia?
Nothing. We've picked.
Surely, there is more to the story of trees.
It is a never-ending story, like the tree of life itself.
I would very much like to hear more about this tree of life. Is that the tree that saves humanity from death and destruction?
Yes, that's why it's called the tree of life. But there is another tree, the tree of knowledge. It's the tree that got us into this hot mess.
Begin by reading Galatians chapter 6 verses 11 to 18, and then John chapter 3 verses 13 to 17. In the beginning of the Bible, in Genesis, it talks about a garden. And in the middle of that garden, it talks about there being two trees. The one is a tree that we're all very familiar with. It's called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And this tree offered all sorts of things. It offered wealth and prosperity. It offered power and influence. It offered fame and luxury. And according to the story, it was good to look at, and it looked to be good for food. And we've all eaten of it. But really, this tree leads to other things completely different. It leads to suspicion and death, disease, poverty, despair, pain, and separation. And And when we look around our world at the moment, we see a good deal of all of those things. Here in this country, this malicious virus is doubling in infections every week at the moment. And then in the United States and in other places, you see that there are huge wildfires burning all over, particularly the western United States. Some of them caused by deliberate arson. In the eastern Mediterranean and Greece, there have been terrible fires that have horribly changed people's lives. In Greece and in Lebanon. There are wars, there are conflicts, there's suspicion. There are people acting against each other's interest. You see that here in Europe, but all over the world. People deliberately violating other people's cultural rights and backgrounds. See that in Australia and China, but actually everywhere. Racism and racial slurs, tribalism, tribal slurs. People looking down on each other simply because of their birth. Corruption, inequality, even migrants and asylum seekers looking for a better life away from the terrible problems that they have been living through, treated shamefully. Terrorism like Boko Haram, ISIS, the Taliban, and many right-wing terrorists as well. I think we can say that we have eaten to the point of satiety of that fruit. But then, in the middle of the Garden of Eden, there's a second tree. You'll find it mentioned in Genesis 2 verse 9. And that tree is the tree of life. The fruit on it did not appeal to Eve. The fruit on it did not appeal to her eye. The fruit on it did not appeal to her tongue. And she did not eat it. It was not good for the eye. It did not look good to the tongue, and would have caused her fear. But St. Paul glories in this tree. He says it brings a new creation, peace, and loving kindness. It was represented in the wilderness by a snake on a stick. In the wilds, in the desert, when people were being bitten by snakes. It looked horrific, but it brought healing to all who saw it. And this tree of life has fruit hanging on it also. And that fruit radiates love through sacrifice. It radiates life through death. It radiates communion to all who eat of it. The fruit is the body of Christ himself, and the tree of life, is the cross of our Lord and God and Saviour Jesus Christ. And now is the time to make sure that you feast upon it. We have eaten to the point of sickness of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But now we need to feast to the point of divinization, theosis, and embodiment on that other tree, the tree of life. Your prayers, God bless you. Amen.
with my newest tree friend, and it's not really a tree per se, it's more of a sage bush, but I have a feeling this bush is really old because it's kind of gnarled. I'll show you in a moment what it looks like, but everywhere I go, everywhere I've lived, I seem to have at least one tree friend, and I think it's something that is really important these days, because in the world that we live in today, we have a lot of disconnection from our earth, Mother Nature, all of this. We yearn for a new connection. We talk about it a lot, we intellectualize it, what it means to reconnect, but in the practice, even though it's something so easy and so simple, sometimes we miss out on the beauty of the practice, and it's in the practice of reconnecting with nature that we are going to learn to love her properly again, that we are going to learn those actions, our attitudes will start changing, and we'll be able to take action in ways that will be a lot more compassionate and helpful. Think about it as making a friend. Of course, if you make a friend and you care about them, you're gonna, act in ways that show that you care about them. So, making a friend with a tree kind of makes sense.
Okay, Gumball. We have learned a lot about trees today.
We've mostly learned what we don't know about trees.
Indeed. I find it strange that the titans of Earth want to flee this planet to colonize another one, when we don't even know what trees are yet.
They are fools. When the Sleeping King awakens, they will have hell to pay for their sins.
Thanks for reminding me. I had almost forgotten about this Sleeping King. Do we have time for one last story about him, before we fade back into the ether?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. Here is the story of the Sleeping King as told by Elder Ephraim.
Is this the same Saint Ephraim whom Jonathan Peugeot was speaking about?
No, but they are related. Locating signal. Transmitting to receptor.
Many blessings to all of you fine people. We are signing off now. We will see you all in the next episode.
Many walk. You set a path. One will complete the journey.
Θυμόμενος στρατηγός ονόματι Ιωάννης, ο οποίος τότε ο Αρχάγγελος Μιχαήλ θα υποδείξει στους χριστιανούς ότι αυτός θα βασιλεύσει τώρα. Θα τους υποδείξει με το δάχτυλο του τον τόπο και θα τον καλέσουν να ηγηθεί και να βασιλεύσει στον ελληνικό και ορθόδοξο λαό. Και θα γίνει αυτό. Πριν από χρόνια στο Άγιον Όρος ήταν ένας αρχιερεύς, ονόματι Ιερόθεος. Αυτός ήρθε από τη Μικρά Ασία και το Οικουμενικό Πατριαρχείο τον έβαλε στο Άγιον Όρος να κάνει χειροτονίες, μνημόσυνα, λειτουργίες κλπ. Ήταν ένας Άγιος αρχιερέας στον τύπο του Αγίου Νικολάου. Από αυτόν τον Άγιον Αρχιερέα αξιώθηκα της ιεροσύνης. Από τη Μικρά Ασία, ευλογημένος άνθρωπος του Θεού. Ένα θα σας πω, αχρυπνίες που κάνουμε 15 ώρες αγρυπνία αυτός ο άνθρωπος, ο το οικοντούτης γέρον, δεν εκάθιτο καθόλου στο κάθισμα. Από το χρόνο κατέβαινε στο στασίδι πάλι όρθιος και στην λειτουργία 3 ώρες που ακολουθούσε μετά την πολύ ωραία ακολουθία του όρθρου, όρθιος. Του βάζαμε μια καρέκλα να καθίσει και δεν ήθελε. Λέει, ακόμα η Παναγία μας δεν με κούρασε και ας έτρεμε όλος από την κούραση. Αυτός ο Άγιος Αρχιερέας, αυτός μας είπε, αυτός είδε τον κοιμόμενο αυτόν στρατηγό που θα μας στηθεί όταν θα γίνει ο τρίτος μεγάλος αυτός παγκόσμιος πόλεμος. Τον είδε, διότι χίλιοι αρχιερέας και ιερέας ουψεύονται. Λοιπόν, μας είπε την αλήθεια και το ρωτήσαμε, διότι ζούσε τότε και ο μακαριστός μου και ο Άγιος Γεροντάς μου και όλοι μαζί συνοδεία τον είχαμε πάρει στο εκκλησάκι μας και εκεί καθίσαμε και το κάναμε τις ερωτήσεις και μας τα έλεγε, τα ακούσαμε με τα αυτιά μας. Λέει, υπάρχει αυτός ο κοιμόμενος βασιλεύς και θα αναστηθεί. Του λέμε, πότε γέροντα, πότε Άγια Αρχιερέα του? Λέει, όταν θα γίνει ο δεύτερος, ο τρίτος παγκόσμιος πόλεμος. Και επίσης μας είπε ότι το δεξί του χέρι είναι στη λαβή του σπαθιού, το οποίο σπαθί είναι μέσα στη φύση. Και λέγεται, μας έλεγε ότι όταν το σπαθί θα βγει από την φύση του, τότε θα γίνει ο τρίτος παγκόσμιος πόλεμος. Εμείς με την περιέργειά μας του λέμε, ξεδαφνιότατε πόσο είναι το σπαθί μέσα στη φύση. Ολίγοι πόντοι εναπέμειναν για να βγει. Και όταν το 55 έκανε εκείνη η Βανδαλίνη πάνω στην Κωνσταντινούπολη και οι Τούρκοι κάνανε τόσες ασχήμες στους αρχιερείς και ιερείς και εκκλησίες και στα μαγαζιά των Ορθοδόξων Ελλήνων, τότε εγώ ήμουνα στο ασκητήρι των Αγίων Αναργύρων και βλέπω τον αρχιερέα έξω από το ασκητήριο σκεπή, στεναχωρημένον, αναμένον, ιδρωμένον και τρέχω έξω και του λέγω, ξεχασμιότατε, περάστε μέσα να σας δώσω ένα ποτήρι νερό γιατί είστε έτσι. Και μου λέει, παιδί μου, λέει, διάκονο, λέει, μήπως είναι τώρα, λέει, που θα γίνει ο τρίτος παγκόσμιος πόλεμος, λέει, γιατί αυτή η Βανδαλινή μήπως είναι η αρχή του πολέμου. Και φοβούμαι γίνει δευτέρα να φυσιώδω και λοιπά. Και δεν ήταν βέβαια εκείνη, δεν ήταν ακόμη η ώρα. Αλλά υπάρχει το άρχος και την γνώξη μου και είναι πάνω στην Κωνσταντινούπολη. Και εν συνέχεια ο Άγιος Κοσμάς Μητωλός λέγει, αφού βασιλεύσει αυτός ο Άγιος Βασιλεύς, τότε αυτός θα ζήσει 33 χρόνια. Η ζωή αυτών των χρόνων θα είναι μια ζωή παραδεισθένια πάνω στη γη, και από όψεως αγαθών και από όψεως πτήσεως. Και τότε λέγει ότι θα εφαρμοστεί το λόγιο του Ευαγγελίου που μας λέγει ο Κύριος ότι θα έρθει το γη, θα γίνει μια πίστη στη στιγμή απάνω στην γη. Και οι άνθρωποι θα ζουν ευτυχισμένα έχοντας ένα τέτοιον Άγιο Βασιλέα να βασιλεύει στην ανθρωπότητα. Μετά από τον θάνατο, τον φυσικό πλέον, του Αγίου αυτού Βασιλέως θα ακολουθήσει η κατάρρευση της ευτυχίας και της πνευματικής και της ηλικής στους ανθρώπους. Επειδή θα είναι λίγοι άνθρωποι και τα αγαθά θα είναι πολλά, και τότε θα είναι εποχή που οι άνθρωποι, ο Χριστός θα είναι σαν τον σίδηρο και από τον Χριστό θα κάνουν κουτάλια και πυρούνια οι άνθρωποι να τρώνε. Και λόγω των πολλών αγαθών θα εφορμήσουν ακράτητοι στις απολαύσεις και θα γίνει και η αμαρτία από τα αγαθά και από την σπατάλη του θείου φόβου αναρτίεται και γεννιέται η μεγάλη αποστασία του ανθρώπου από τον Θεό. Θα αρχίσει η κατάρρευση της ηθικής σαν κύριο αποτέλεσμα της καταρρεύσεως και αμέσως οι άνθρωποι θα γίνουν σάρκες όπως επινόη. Τι ήταν επινόη? οι άνθρωποι ντοθήκανε στα αγαθά και τρώγαν και έπιναν κλπ. Και τους βρήκε ο κατακλυσμός και απόλυτο οι πάντες. Έτσι και στην περίπτωση αυτή, μετά την κίνηση αυτή του Αγίου Βασιλέως, θα καταρρεύσει όλη η ηθική, οι άνθρωποι θα καταρρεύσουν πνευματικά, θα αρχίσει ο φόβος του Θεού να χάνεται και θα αναφύεται μετά από την απουσία του Θεού φόβου η αποστασία θα φέρει την στέρηση και της χάριτος του Θεού και επομένως θα επακολουθήσει και η στέρηση των αγαθών σαν συνέχεια και σαν απάντηση της αποστασίας, σαν εγκατάλειψη του Θεού, και τότε σε εκείνη την κατάσταση, την πολύ έτσι, που δεν θα έχει καθόλου φόβο Θεού μέσα και πίστη, θα γεννηθεί ο Αντίχριστος και θα αρχίσει να κηρύττει προς τον εαυτόν του πίστη ότι είναι ο Μεσσίας και ότι αυτός θα είναι ο μόνος που θα βοηθήσει και θα σώσει το ανθρώπινο γένος από αυτή την καταστροφή και την δυστυχία. Και τότε οι υπάρχοντες ελάχιστοι ιερείς, οι φοβούμενοι τον Θεό, με τους ολίγους χριστιανούς, τους πιστούς, θα φύγουν στα όρια και στις φυλές, φέροντας μαζί τους λίγο αγάπη, και εκεί θα φύγουν την σφράγιση του Κυρίου του Αντιχρίστου. Και όσοι θα ομολογήσουν πίστη στο Χριστό θα μαρτυρήσουν πολύ σκληρά. Τότε θα ταυτιστούν και οι μεγάλοι Άγιοι που δεν υπέφεραν φυσικό θάνατο, ο Ενώχ, ο Ηλίας και ο Ιωάννης ο Θεολόγος, και θα δώσουν τη μαρτυρία του Ιησού και θα σφαγιστούν από τον Αντίχριστο και θα τύχουν το μαρτυρίο, και έτσι θα ακολουθήσουν και αυτοί τους μαθητάς που υπέστησαν το μαρτυρικό τέλος. Και έτσι θα ακολουθήσει με τα τάφα η συντέλεια.
Thanks for watching. Pixel Talk will return.
Visit tigla.com for more art, apparel, and things yet to be revealed.